Hi, I'm Carolyn Eyrich Mastin, and I'm going to read you The Rag Book by Lauren Mills. In winter, Papa carried me to church in a burlap feed sack because I didn't have a coat. Mama, Papa, Clemmy, and me. We'd all hitch a ride in Jeremy Miller's hay wagon and huddle under Mama's big quilt. I know Papa loved that quilt because he said it had all the nice, bright colors of the day in it, and the day was something he hardly ever saw. He worked down in the black coal mines and didn't come up until the sun was gone. I told Papa it was warmer under that quilt than if I'd had a coat. He always laughed when I said that and told me, "Mina, you got the right way of thinking. People only need people, and nothing else. Don't you forget that." Papa got sick with the miner's cough and couldn't work so much. So Mama stitched day and night on her quilts to try to make some money. And when I was old enough to go to school, I couldn't go. They needed me at home to help Mama. I would card all her quilt stuffing and keep Clemmy's dirty fingers out of all that cotton. I made a doll for myself by stitching up some of Mama's quilt scraps and stuffing cotton inside. I talked to her like she was my friend, because I didn't have any. Mama was too busy for much talk, and when Papa was home, he mostly stared out the window. The summer I was 8, Papa called me over to his rocking chair. I climbed up in his lap, and he said, "You're getting big, Mina." "Too big for laps?" I asked. "Not too big for mine," he said softly, "but too big to still be at home. It's nearing time you went to school." I could hardly hold back my smiling, just thinking about all the friends I would have. But I didn't want to leave Mama without a helper. "Papa," I said, "I can't go to school. Mama needs me here." Papa just looked at me real steady and said, "They have books at school, Mina. You will learn things from those books that you can't learn at home." "But I don't have a coat, Papa," I quietly reminded him. "Mina," he said, "don't worry about a coat. I'll think of something." But he never got a chance. Papa died that summer. Everyone came at once and brought us food. I couldn't figure out how so many people could squeeze into our little cabin, but somehow they managed it, and they all said they knew my Papa well. I sat on a stool back by the wood stove with Clemmy on my lap so no one would step on us. I couldn't stand it. They all wore black. Black like the coal mines that killed my Papa. He didn't even like black. He liked the bright colors of the day. So why were they all wearing black, I wondered. School started in September. Mama said I could go, but I decided not to. I still didn't have a coat to wear, and I knew it was no use starting something I'd have to quit when the weather turned cold. Other mothers who had children in school came over to quilt with Mama. I called them the quilting mothers. That fall, they were all working on a pattern called Joseph's Coat of Many Colors. I looked at it and said that Joseph sure was lucky to have such a coat. I wish I had one like that. "Why do you say that, Mina?" Mrs. Miller asked me. "Because then I could go to school," I said, a little embarrassed that I'd even mentioned it. "Well now, Mina," said Mrs. Miller, "I don't know that any of us has a coat to spare that we could hand down to you, but I'm sure we have some scraps to spare. We could piece them together and you'd have a coat like Joseph's after all." Mrs. Miller looked around the room and the other mothers nodded. Mama quickly protested. "You all need those rags for your own quilts. Don't giving us things you need yourselves." But they paid no attention to Mama. Mrs. Hunter said, "And we could use feed bags for the inside of the coat." My eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't embarrassed anymore. I said, "I have a feed sack Papa used to carry me in. I ran and fetched it. Will this do?" Yes, it would do just fine, they told me. Then I thought of something important. But you need to make quilts to sell. You can't take time out to quilt a coat. First things first, said Mrs. Miller, and they all repeated it. Mama smiled and shook her head, and I saw tears in her eyes too. The very next day I went to school, running most of the way to keep warm and thinking all the while of the coat I would soon have. The schoolhouse was just a room filled with 14 children. Yeah, I had seen most of them at church, but never got a chance to talk with them much. I knew I would love school even though I was put in the front row with the youngest ones. And Clyde Bradshaw whispered that it was because I was dumb. Then Shane Hunter pulled my braid. And Sochie Miller said I asked the teacher too many questions. But our teacher, Miss Campbell, smiled at me and said, smart people are those who have asked a lot of questions. My most favorite thing about school was sharing day. Each of us had our own day when we shared something special with the class. Clyde Bradshaw brought in the watch his grandpa gave him. It still ticked, and he made sure we heard it. On her day, Lottie showed us the porcelain doll her aunt from New York had sent her. We all thought it was the most beautiful thing ever and wanted to touch it, but Lottie wouldn't let anyone near it. She said, nope, it's mine, which made everybody mad. I just knew what I would show when it was my sharing day, but I kept it a secret, and I knew the quilting mothers would keep it a secret too. Each day I hurried home to see my coat. It was looking like the colors of the fall days. The yellow gold for the birch leaves, the silvery grays and purples of the sky, the deep greens and browns of the pines, and the rusty reds of the chimney bricks. All the colors Papa would have chosen. I decided to put a piece of his work jacket in there. It just seemed right. The mothers worked as quickly as they could, but the cold weather was quicker. At recess, Sochie asked why I didn't wear a coat. I told her I couldn't jump rope as well with one on. Jumping a lot kept me warm. I was fast becoming the best rope jumper in the school. Not last night, but the night before, 24 robbers came knocking at my door. That was my favorite rope tune. One night when Mother looked sad, I told her things could be worse. We could have 24 robbers knocking at our door. And she said, now what on earth would they want from us, Mina? Oh, Mama, they would want the coat first thing, I said. She laughed then, but I was most serious. Finally, my coat was done. It was so beautiful, and the quilting mothers had finished it in time for my sharing day. That morning, I walked to school looking down at all the different colored pieces of cloth in my coat. All the stories the quilting mothers had told me about the rags and who they belonged to. I knew them by heart. I had ended up choosing the most worn pieces for my coat because the best stories went with them. I was still looking down and repeating each story to myself when I bumped into Clyde outside the schoolyard. Hey, ragcoat, he said, and all the others laughed. And before I knew it, Sochie, Lottie, and Clyde were dancing around me, singing, ragcoat, ragcoat. Lottie said, look, it's even dirty with soot, and she poked her finger into my papa's cloth. Then Sochie said, hey, Mina, you were better off with no coat than with that old ragged thing. Maybe you're right, I yelled. If I had had no coat, then I never would have come to school. And I broke through the circle and ran away far from them, far into the woods. I felt an old log and sat down on it for a long time. Too angry to cry, I just stared across the fields Papa used to gaze at. Oh, Papa, I wish you were here, I said, and then I couldn't help but cry. I cried for Papa, and I cried for the quilting mothers who had wasted their time. I was crying so hard that I rocked that old log. Then all at once I stopped because I felt something warm and familiar. The feed bag inside my coat made me feel like Papa's arms were around me again. I could almost hear him say, "Mina, people only need people and nothing else. Don't you forget that." I jumped off the log, wiped the tears from my cheeks, and brushed the leaves off my coat. "I won't forget it, Papa," I said, and I headed back to school. When I walked into the schoolroom, Miss Campbell looked up, surprised. "Why, Mina," she said, "I was told you ran home sick." Sosie jumped up, her face all red. That's not true, Miss Campbell," she blurted out. "We lied to you. Mina left because we made fun of her old coat." "I'll tell her, Sosie," I said. "It's not an old coat. It's a new coat." "But it's just a bunch of old rags," said Lottie. "It's not just a bunch of old rags," I said. "My coat is full of stories. Stories about everybody here." They all looked at me, real puzzled. "Don't you see? These are your rags." They still seemed puzzled, so I showed them. "Look, Shane, here is the blanket of yours that your mama's sister gave you on the night you were born. The midwife said you wouldn't live but 3 days because you were so small. But your mama wrapped you up tight in that blanket and put you in a little box by the wood stove. And your papa kept the fire all night for 3 weeks. Of course, you lived all right," I said, looking up at Shane. Shane was big. "And you hung on to that blanket for years until it was nothing but shreds." "My blanket," he whispered. "I thought I'd never see it again." He looked at his old rag like he wanted to touch it. Then the others began discovering their old favorite things and crowded around me. They each wanted their story told, and I remembered every one. I even showed the piece of the woolen jacket Sosie had let her calf wear when it was sick. Lottie's rag was a faded piece from the fancy dress her aunt from New York had sent her on her 7th birthday. And Clyde had a scrap from the pants he always wore when he went fishing with his grandpa. Sushi said, "Mina, I sure am sorry we ever said anything bad about your coat." "Me too," I heard the others murmur. "I wouldn't blame you if you didn't let us touch it," Lottie said. "I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to be our friend at all," said Clyde. "Friends share," I said, and I let them each touch their rag. Then I showed them the feed sack inside my coat and told them how it made me feel my papa's arms again. Shane put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Mina, I bet you got the warmest coat in the school." "Well, it took a whole lot of people to make it warm," I told him, and we all laughed. The end.